thought-provoking podcast that sheds light on the challenges faced by young people living in urban areas. We highlight the resilience and creativity of young leaders who are finding innovative ways to overcome the challenges our young people are facing, inspiring listeners to take action to support them. This is A Different Cloth.
Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to A Different Cloth podcast. I'm your host, Jose, and I got a super dope special guest with us today, none other than Ryan Tillman. Hey, look, all this next month, we're going to be talking about rescued rescuers, and we're highlighting stories of people that are committed to rescuing a generation in their own capacity and in their own lens. And Ryan is doing that and so much more. And so, Ryan, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Appreciate you, Jose. Man, absolutely. It's an honor to be here, my brother. This is a long time coming, but we made it happen.
Absolutely, man. Well, Ryan, real quick, why don't you just give us a snapshot of who you are, and just some of the work that you do, and then we'll jump in from there.
Man, nowadays it feels like that's a weighted question. You know, people always ask me what I do, but it's like, what don't I do? A snapshot of me is like, by trade, I've been a police officer for over 10 years. I had no aspirations of becoming a police officer. I didn't like cops. I had some bad experiences with cops. But man, let me tell you what happens when you say yes to God. Mm-hmm. And so I got into the profession over 10 years ago, asking God why. Before that, I was like, man, I want to be a business owner. I want to do this. I want to do that. And it felt like at the time God told me no. Okay. But little did I realize he was actually telling me yes, but I was just going to be doing it his way. So I got into law enforcement. And then about a year and a half into law enforcement, that's when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. Okay. And I remember just thinking like, man, like it sucks to be a cop right now. I'm a black police officer. My people hate me. They think I'm a sellout. There's some have called me Uncle Tom. They've called me Coon, you name it. And then inside of law enforcement, I had people that didn't understand why the minority community was up in arms with law enforcement. So I was always torn. And then I had a conversation with my mom back then. And my mom was like, man, I was thinking about what you would have done given that set of circumstances. And she was like, he would have did the exact same thing. And that's when the light bulb went off. And I realized the only reason she sees it that way is because her son now is a police officer. So I think that was the light bulb moment for me that said like, hey, look, you need to go out there, bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community by showing who you are, the human side of you. And that kind of spanned into me starting to do presentations in churches and schools about bridging that gap. That'll end up evolving into going into college, going into corporate settings, doing mentorship. And then we also started doing education for the community about what law enforcement's about. And we put out crazy amounts of content to do that. And so now it's evolved into so much more than just bridging the gap between law enforcement. It's really kind of, and I hate to be cliche, but it's really turned into me trying to rescue a generation.
Yeah, no, I love that, bro. Thank you for saying yes to the call of God and your commitment. I am all too familiar with what it means sometimes to be unliked or the odd one or the one that people don't understand. And so if you don't mind, I'd love to lean into that part of the conversation first, because I think in leadership, so many times people are in leadership because they want to be liked. They want to be the good guy. They want to be the one that everybody's high-fiving and praising. They want the platform, the microphone. Can we talk just a little bit about some of that opposition that you received and just how you handle that? Because here's the reason. There's so many people that allow opposition to get them jaded and literally derail them from the call of God in their life. And clearly you're still on the course. You're still running forward, right? And so how do you respond when you're operating from a different cloth and you're not your status quo, your norm, and there's opposition, there's hate, there's words that are being thrown at you? How did you respond to that when all that started happening?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Initially, I mean, we're all human. And my wife will tell you, like, when people were dogging me out at first, like, it would fire me up. Like, I'd be ready to throw paws with people. Like, I'm like, man, like, I'd be ready to defend every single person that came at me. But over time, I started realizing what God revealed to me is like, shoot, the one that was crucified and criticized the most was Jesus himself. Yeah. So it means that obviously my dad told me this lesson when I was younger. He was like, man, if people aren't talking about you, then you're doing something wrong. So I kind of started to embrace the opposition, and it was opposition. It wasn't like a prideful thing. It wasn't an arrogance thing that I wanted people to be talking about me, but was more of like, we're not called to be like the rest of the world. We're called to be set apart. Yeah. And I really felt the call of my life was to go out there and be different. I remember when I met my beautiful wife years ago, one of the things that I valued about our relationship when we first met was, she held me to a higher standard of what I was supposed to be as a man. At the time when we met, I used to cuss all the time. I was saying all these different things. And, it was almost like, if you want to be with me, you're not going to be doing that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't really, like in my mind, I was almost kind of selfish, like, man, I'm going to be me. But she held me to a higher standard. But what I started to realize as I went on in life is like, as a believer in Christ, as a man of God, like we are called to be set apart.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you do the right things for the right reasons, it's going to ruffle feathers, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Scripture tells us that in the latter days, good will be bad and bad will be good. And so I've realized that a lot of times when I'm ruffling feathers, it's because that's prophecy almost playing its way out. Is like, look, people don't like truth. People don't like honesty, but that shouldn't derail me from walking in truth. And so now my goal is to, as long as you walk in truth, as long as I'm doing everything unto my Savior, then I don't have to worry about what people say. And trust me, I get people, you go on my Instagram right now, I can go through right now and call some folks out. But now now it motivates me now, because now I'm like, man, like I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because people ain't feeling this.
Wow. Thank you for that. And really what a solid answer. What I'm reminded of is when the enemy comes in like a flood, God will always raise the standard. And I'm listening to you about, man, when we are under attack, when things are coming at us, that is not the time to fold or to give up or to give in. It's actually the time to raise the standard. And I would even say become even more above reproach, right? And so that way they have nothing to say outside of maybe what you represent or what they think of you or whatever, right? And so I just kudos to you on that. Can
I add on something that real quick? Is I think one of the things I've also learned in this journey is one of the best things you can do to people or to the opposition is respond with grace and mercy. Now, I know that sounds like oh, okay, that's the cliche answer, but no, it's amazing what happens when you do that. I love doing this. It's kind of sarcastic, but it's so funny. But people will come at me, right? And they'll say something, and I'll respond with truth and facts. And I'll always end with, God bless you. And like when I do that, for whatever reason, it disarms them. And what I've actually seen happen is I'll have people DM me and say like, hey, even though I don't agree with you, like I appreciate your respect or whatever. And then I've even had people come around and say, you know what, I actually see this differently now.
Wow.
And like, man, thanks for educating me. And so it just shows the value of when you respond with grace and mercy of what it really does. It's not saying to respond with grace and mercy just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
It's because it really does cultivate a change, because you are you're acting, living, breathing witness for what Christ has called us to do. So that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned with all the haters out there.
I love it. And I mean, even to that point, the greatest weapon that we have against the enemy is actually love. It's not power. It's not force. It's even not prayer, even though we do have this, that we can pray.
Love your enemies.
It's when we love, we possess the one thing the devil doesn't.
Correct.
And so, man, kudos to you for just understanding that grace, mercy, and love component. And I've been there in different contexts. Obviously, you, have a very public Instagram and I've seen the comments, and it's been really cool. Now let's talk about you being a rescuer, because I would imagine you're a police officer. You're seeing things from a lens of a police officer, and there's probably good, bad, and ugly in that. I would imagine that.
Absolutely.
I've never been a police officer. Actually, probably been on the opposite side of that. But but I would imagine you see a lot. Now you are in a lot of schools. You're coming face to face with students that probably would at some level find themselves in opposition to the law. How do you view them? Let's talk. So I know a big part of your thing is to change the way people view policing. Let's talk about how you view those students, those young people, in light of the work you're doing now as a rescuer. Like, how are you able to walk into those knowing that you were probably fighting for your life in some of these other contexts?
Yeah.
But you're on a campus, you see some of these students, and you're like, I kind of know the type, right?
Yeah.
How are you able to look at them, love them, embrace them, despite kind of some of your other experience in the law enforcement?
It's very simple, man. I treat them like they're my own. It's very, very simple. My father told me when I was growing up, he would always say, like, man, Ryan, you need to treat people like they're your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your cousin.
Okay.
He would always tell me that. And, my dad has since passed on, and And I try to live a life to allow his legacy to continue. But that's probably one of the greatest lessons I've learned. So when I walk into a room and I see these children, I treat them like they're my own. Like I have 3 kids.
Wow.
But if you walked, I served as a school resource officer for probably about almost 2 years. And I think one of the the biggest things that I left at that campus with a lot of those students is that, man, like Tillman always treated me like he was my own or like I was his own. And so that has really like allowed me to go in and really have a heart to help them and save them. I was in New Jersey a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about the loss of my dad and how I overcame the loss of my dad. And you know, you never know, and you've been speaking for a long time, you just never know who you're going to talk to, who you're going to impact. And so this girl comes up to me, she tells me about it. And so I asked her, I said, hey, did you lose your dad? And she was like, yeah, I lost my dad. And so I was like, well, how did you lose your dad, if you don't mind me asking? She said, well, my mom shot him. Wow. And my heart just like, my mouth just like dropped. I was like, I don't even know how to respond to that. Like, you know, so not only did you lose your dad, but you lost your mom, I would imagine. Yeah. And here you are going to school, and you are required to still live up to the same standard as every other student that may not be going through that trauma. You're expected to get good grades. You're expected to show up on time. You're expected to eat lunch. You're like all these different standards that you have, but yet you're going through all this trauma at home. Yeah. So if you don't receive love, if you don't receive mercy from the people or teachers that don't have that godly lens, then who are you going to get it from? So I had to realize that, look, man, like these kids they're up against a lot of odds. The odds are stacked against them, and somebody has to love them. Yeah. So one of my presentations I do is called The Power of Hello. And when everybody walks into the room, I make it a point to say hello or what's up to almost every student that walks in that auditorium. Yep. And I tell them, I say, hey, look, I don't know if you realize, but everybody that walked in this auditorium, I pretty much said hello or what's up to you, because there's power in my words. Some of you guys realize or walk around and act like nobody, or you feel like nobody sees you or nobody recognizes you. Wow. But I want you to know that you know at least one person sees you and I see you. And so I think that's why I have a heart for these kids, because they might not have that person at home that has a heart for them. Yeah. The concept of treating them as my own, I think, man, it just crosses all types of barriers and boundaries, right? Because I think any person that wants to make an impact in the life of a young person, if you was to take that approach, it's going to give you another level of grace and mercy for them, because it's easy for me to critique and judge a stranger, and way harder for me to critique and judge my own, right? Because they're like my own. You have so much more grace for your kids. Like, exactly. Jack your house up, but you still find yourself giving them what they want at dinner time. Oh, man, exactly. And so much of what you just described is the world that we live in at Rescue a Generation, and so much that shaped the work we do. I remember I was at a school campus, and I don't know all the young ladies' background. I've shared this story. I don't know if I have on the podcast or not, but I've shared it a lot. But man, young lady comes in, bad attitude, bunch of friends, recipe for disaster, and she had just got suspended for fighting the school police officer. Oh, wow. So she was about it. She was about that life. She was about that life. And but she comes in, and we coach, and so we're asking a bunch of questions, and I asked the question, what's the worst thing you've ever done? And she raised her hand, you know, because they're bold pretty much. So there's like 100 kids in the library. We're doing this. And she said, I fought my grandma. And I was like, look, I done a lot of bad things.
How you fight granny?
I said, I ain't never fought a grandma. That's pretty intense.
Yeah. But I said, can I ask you a series of questions in front of all your friends here and just kind of see how you got there? And she said, yeah. So I'm start asking her questions, and we get to this place where out of her mouth, she says, I feel like my family don't love me. And I would imagine there's a lot of trauma and pain there. That's sad. Now, in coaching, you hear that. And my next question was, okay, maybe that's true. And that may be the fact. Or does anybody in your family love you? Like, is there one that you can say love? And then her whole tone changed. And she said, actually, I know my family loves me. I just don't always feel like they love me. And so there's this whole lens that she's living out of. And so when we talk about it, those students who are doing it, so much of that is because of the filter and their own mindsets around how they view people and what they feel like they experience. And that young lady literally, so we had a powerful moment in that conversation. And then she ghosted me the rest of the school year and never saw her again until the very last day. She comes back and she says, hey, I got to say thank you. She said, for the first time ever, I walked away from fights this year because of the conversation we had. And I'm thinking, to me, I'm like, yes. Like, because the one shift in a mindset could shift everything. So when you're saying hello to everybody, when you're greeting, when you're connecting with these young people in these rallies and assemblies, and by the way, your boy got some moves over here too. I said that you just go to his Instagram. That first video, he's
almost threw a hip out.
That was super dope. But thank you, man, for just being willing to hear their stories and to see from their perspective. Because let me be careful how I say this. From an urban lens, we don't always think police officers understand
100%.
or see the stories
100%.
or hear, or have empathy toward how and so that's where you get a lot of the friction at between cops and communities. So I want to shift this direction. A big part of what you do is around helping people understand even policing and how important it is, number one. But I would imagine even how we relate to cops.
Yeah.
I mentioned this and I haven't shared on here at all, but I was on the opposite side of the law. I got arrested twice for stealing cars as a teenager, and one time, literally, I'm in the passenger seat. I'm the last. There's three of my friends. I'm the last one. They pull out the car, and I got 7 cops pointing guns at me.
Oh wow!
And obviously, you're cooperating at that point. You're like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Whatever
whatever y'all need.
And so I do. I get out and I listen. I get back, and they say, "Put your hands behind your head." And then the dude grabs me, and he strong arms me a little bit. All good. But then he picks me up. I was a little skinny kid back then, but he picks me up by my forearm and then throws me on my face on the ground. And from that point forward, how I viewed a cop, I always heard the stories of no, we don't do cops and da-da-da-da. How I viewed a cop drastically changed because of that one moment.
Oh, 100%.
Don't get me wrong. I was in a stolen car. So I am by all means understanding the nature of my crime and what I did and how serious that is.
But it didn't deserve for you to be treated like that.
And that, to me, that's why, but there's so many stories of that. Now, I also worked at a crisis intervention, community intervention center in Oklahoma. And we were you imagine if California had this, where we were a one-stop shop where a cop could come in and drop a teenager off and be back on the road in 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Back on there. Because when you get a teenager, you got to stay with them until
forever.
And so literally we were this
That's
center.
pretty cool.
So I got to see a lot of really, really good cops in me doing that.
Yeah.
Because now I'm getting these teenagers and I'm working with them. And I just got, some of them were so dope, and they were so and even how they related to kids was dope. And so sometimes you have one experience and it just shapes everything of how you view a particular type of people, and that can go in whatever direction you want. Can you give some insight or some light into what does it mean to change the way or to view policing the right way? How? And particularly our audience, for the most part, are leaders who are working in inner cities, urban America, and for them and the students they work with, how can we go help our students understand that policing is valuable and not every cop is a bad cop? I know this is a weighty question, but I hope that makes sense.
Good. No, it's really, really good. So I started the podcast and I talked about one thing is truth. And I always got to start with truth. If you can accept truth for what it is, then we can have a conversation. And the reason I got to start it with truth is because it's unfortunate. Law enforcement is one of the only professions where we don't receive the level of grace that every other profession receives.
And pastoring.
And pastoring. Yeah. And what I mean by that is for example, if you look up the top leading causes of death right now, I think number 1, is traffic collisions. Number 2, I want to say is cancer. Number 3, I think is medical malpractice. Don't quote me on that, but I think the last time I checked, those were the top 3. But I want to focus in on number 3, medical malpractice. So that means that, you go into the doctors, you go in for a surgery, The doctor comes out, says, hey, unfortunately, your family, your loved one didn't make it out. We all leave saying, oh, man, that sucks. We didn't expect it to lose them that way. What you don't realize is that the reason you lost them is because the doctor snipped something he wasn't supposed to snip. What you don't realize is that the doctor left a medical glove in there. You didn't realize that. What you don't realize is those doctors were in there talking while they were doing a medical surgery, and it caused a malfunction.
Wow.
But yet, all of us, if something happened to us, we still go to that doctor's office and we have faith that that doctor is going to do what they have to do, and we don't crucify the doctor because we don't know. So the reason I say that is because culturally we have been driven and pushed to not like police officers because it's been culturally accepted to do that. And it's so layered on so many different levels. So what I'm not excusing is that the fact that from a cultural standpoint, law enforcement is not always operated in the right. You can look that up. Systematically speaking, you can go back decades and see where law enforcement have done some unethical, immoral things.
Sure.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to sugarcoat that.
No, yeah.
But what I am trying to say is that we have pushed this cultural agenda that if a white police officer does something against a minority, that they're the enemy. And now it's so much so that we even encourage our kids to stand up against law enforcement because that's the man and stuff like that. And so the reason there's a problem is because when our young kids get in these vehicles, they are so in fear of their life, of law enforcement, that they feel that if they get pulled over by a police officer, it's all over. When statistically speaking, the odds of you dying by a police officer are slim to none. You're almost more likely to get struck by lightning than you will by a police officer, but culture will tell you everything otherwise. Sure. So the reason all those things are so important to understand is that I have an obligation to not only bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community because it's the right thing to do, but facts, truth, and everything else will tell you that culturally we have made it acceptable for us to look at law enforcement as being our enemy. So in order to bridge the gap, I do it through education and telling people what is right and what is wrong, and I don't sugarcoat. I've called out police officers for doing bad things, but I also will educate people on the right things that police officers do. So if we're talking to leaders about how do we, encourage the next generation to support law enforcement, we have to be able to educate them on what the job is and why they do the job. What's interesting is there's so many people that claim they don't like police officers, but the moment they find themselves in an emergency, they'll be the first to pick up that number and dial 911. And so we have to be able to embrace this relationship that it cohesively exists together. And if we have better relationships with one another, then we can move the pendulum forward. But I also have that same message to police. And I'm saying just because we know what the reality is and just because we know what the facts is, it shouldn't rid you from the fact of going out there and getting to know the community before you have to know them.
It's really good.
So I'm always out there trying to get to know the community. It's funny. I remember when I working in Chino for years, I was investing, and my wife would tell you I spent a lot of time getting to know that community. So this is a true story. I was actually on a stop where somebody was in a stolen vehicle. It wasn't you. And so I'm on a stop where somebody's in a stolen vehicle, and we're in an apartment complex, and there's like everybody and their mama's outside, got their cameras out, everything, FBR, F12, all this other stuff. So we got our guns out, 6 guns, like you said. We got our guns out at this person because that's real stuff. And so like everybody's yelling at us, they're all mad. And then like after a while, like I got my gun pointed at the car, and then I just hear like, is that Tillman? Hey, yo, is that Tillman? And then I look over, I'm like trying to look all tough and stuff. I'm like, who's that? It's this lady. She's like, hey, that's Tillman. She's like, hey, y'all, we good. Don't even trip. We good. So then we ended up finishing the stop. We pulled the dude out of the car. Find out that lady that was like, is that Tillman? She's been following me forever. So all the people that were all rowdy, she's like, oh, Tillman's cool. Like I follow him. I watch all of his content. Like we got a good one out here. And she's like, oh yeah, the dude that you pulled over is actually my nephew. I was like, oh, well, I need some info. I need some information from you. But I share that story because it just shows what happens when you invest into the community. And so it's you got to look at it from both sides. Like culturally, we can't always believe everything we see on TV. Like you look at some of the other things that are more likely to kill you and be afraid of those things. But then on the same hand, like as law enforcement, we have an obligation to partner with our community. Because we have to work together.
Man, so much of what you said I appreciate, because to me it focuses on relational equity within a community, right? That lady being able to call your name, express some level of relationship that she had with you, even if it was just through your content. She knew who you were enough to be like, hey, let's disarm that's literally what shapes all the work that we do at Rescue Generation is like, how do we build relational equity with students so that way when we need it, we can cash out on it.
Always. You're always going to have to make a withdrawal.
Yeah. And so it's like, man, what you're describing is a communal approach of us doing this together, not us versus them, but how do we do this together? Now, I want to be oh so real and be like, yo, and you alluded to it, and I appreciated your honesty of saying, well, like, not every cop has made the right decision. Not 100%.
I'll be the first to say that.
Yeah. And so I really appreciate that a lot because I do feel like it almost feels like some people in your position are either on one side or the other. And so, but your stand for truth, you're like, no, hey, what's the truth and where does this fall? I just got a ton of respect for that. And so thank you for,
I appreciate that, man.
For going there and for answering that question. I was thinking of one other thought around just some of the fun stuff that you get to do, right? You get to speak to a lot of students, man. You get to dance on schools and all of that. And some of that's so engaging. Man, can you just give me like a highlight moment of some of the work you do? And it could be a story of like impact that you saw or felt, or like tell us a little bit around, hey, you being a rescuer, man, you're doing all this stuff on schools, or it could be the other route, because I saw you just train some police people, like, so maybe it's an impact story on that side, but give us an impact story of some of the work that you're doing currently.
I think my ultimate impact story goes back to the video that you saw, the dancing video. I've done a lot of stuff. I have stories for days, and you can read a lot of these stories in my book. We have a book called Happy Eyes that I wrote.
Yeah.
Becoming all things to all people, so that way you might win some. So you can read a lot of those stories. But I think one of the ultimate stories for me, or impact moments, was my dance. And the reason I say it was an impact story was not the fact that it was seen over 100 million times. Video's been seen over 100 million times collectively on all the different platforms, which is crazy. But it was a fact of what it took to get to that moment. My wife would tell you, like, when I first got started in law enforcement, I'll never forget, I got asked to go do a recruiting seminar. And when I went to this recruiting event, I danced for the first time because Billy Blanks Jr. was there following in his daddy's footsteps, doing Tae Bo with all the ladies and stuff like that. Y'all remember y'all parents was in the living room doing Tae Bo. And so Billy Blanks Jr.
Pablo
was there.
Tae Bo.
I just saw him while doing it. But anyways, so like he was there, and so like they played the Cuba Shuffle. You know, the Cuba Shuffle is that song, like, you know, that song, come on, anybody get out of your seat. Grandma, you can have no rhythm in your body and you'll get up and start dancing the Cuba Shuffle. So it came on, and so I started dancing in uniform, and it went on IG, and it kind of went viral for the time. This was when IG first was out. So I got a lot of support, but guess what, the people that weren't supportive of that? Law enforcement.
Wow.
So then fast forward a few years, or like a year later, I used to do these things called Soulful Sundays. I used to do a little lip sync in my car, just making fun of light of, you know, what I was doing in my uniform. Got so much support from the community, but guess who was hating on it? Law enforcement.
Wow.
So they were trying to suppress my voice for many, and it sucked because I'm like, this is who I am. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We want the community to see the human side of us. If you want the community to have grace and mercy, you want them to see the human side. So anyways, I didn't let that discourage me. And so I fast forward a few years later, I became a school resource officer. It was probably one of the best assignments I had. I got to establish so many great relationships. I actually saved one of the students' lives. He got shot in the summertime, and I was the first on scene, and I was the one holding his chest as he was bleeding out. And he was actually his family was from a notable gang, and so I saved his life and things. So I had all sorts of memories with these students. And so I got promoted, and when I got promoted, it meant I was going to be leaving the school. And so when I found out I was going to be leaving the school, I was like, man, I got to do something for these kids they'll never forget. And so I was like, you know what? I love to dance. I met my wife on the dance floor. You know, your boy likes to cut a rug. And so like, I was like, I'm going to dance. And so going back to how we initially first started this conversation, I could have easily given into the haters a long time ago. I could have easily allowed them to suppress who I was, but I didn't. And I allowed, you know, my ability to shine for Christ to go before me. And so I choreographed a dance with the dance team, and I did it at a pep rally, and it surprised everyone. I had my videographer there, and we captured it. And that video still, that was in 2019, that video still goes viral. And so if I look back at an impact moment that forever changed like so many lives, including my own.
Yeah.
It was probably that video. And I always, when Ryan Tillman is long gone, that video will still be going.
Wow. Thank you,
No
bro,
problem.
for sharing that. Hey, real quick, excuse me. Can you just tell us a little bit where to find you, where to follow you?
Yeah.
Tell us your book, the name of your book, where they can go buy the book at.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me. I'm Breaking Barriers United on all platforms. So TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, website. I mean, if you guys want to go down the rabbit hole, go to my Instagram or YouTube. You will go down the rabbit hole and just find yourself locked in all these different videos I put out.
I've done it a few times.
Yeah, and so you could do that. And then our book is called Happy Eyes. You can buy it on Amazon. It's called Becoming All Things to All People. The forward is actually written by your boy, Dak Prescott.
Let's go. Cowboys, baby.
So Dak is
Shout out to Dak if you ever watch this.
Dak Prescott is a phenomenal dude. He is a phenomenal man on the field and off the field. So we have the opportunity of running a lot of his after school programs and mentor programs and stuff. So if you guys want to buy that book, make sure you guys check it out on Amazon.
It's great, bro. Thank you so much. You, your wife, your team coming today and hanging with us here at RAG. And man, we're excited. You are the epitome of what I think it looks like to be a different cloth.
I appreciate you, brother.
So thank you for all that you're doing. We're linking arms with you, rocking with you.
Oh, man.
Can't wait to see where
the
this
best
goes.
is yet to come, bro. Thank you so much, Jose. And
For sure.
Thank you to the hospitality, your whole team here, and your beautiful wife in the other room. And, man, like I said, the best is yet to come, my brother.
It's great. All right. Like, follow, subscribe. We'll see y'all soon.
Peace.